Welcome to my series of basketball videos where I'll be comparing various NBA grades against each other. I'm doing this because I find that a lot of the basketball videos comparing players on YouTube are too focused on the big names, and sometimes compare players from different positions. For example, lots of people compare Jordan to LeBron and Kobe to Duncan, just because of their similar levels of achievements, but since those players play different positions and have different styles of play, it's not an interesting comparison. In this series, I want to do a comparison not between just more well-known players, but players from days past, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and even the ABA as well, that most modern fans probably do not have too much knowledge about. Also, as much as possible, I want to compare players that play similar positions and have similar play styles. To me, that's a more interesting and fruitful comparison. I'll be using 6 different metrics to compare each player. The first category is scoring. This category will be defined by each player's career points per game, peak points per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of scoring titles. Rebounding. This category will be defined by each player's career rebounds per game, peak rebounds per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of rebounding titles. Passing. This category will be defined by each player's career assists per game, peak assists per game both regular season and playoffs, and number of assist titles. Efficiency and advanced metrics. This category will be defined by each player's career true shooting percentage per and win shares per 48, both in the regular season and playoffs. The reason I use true shooting percentage is because it's more fair to guards. Field goal percentage tends to be biased to big men because of their height and play style closer to the basket. I also put in win shares per 48 here because it encompasses efficiency along with other attributes to give you an idea of how many wins a player contributes to his team. Defense. This category will be defined by each player's all defensive selections, defensive win shares, and defensive player of the year awards. The reason I'm not using blocks and steals in this comparison is because I want to compare the achievements of older players that modern fans might not have too much knowledge about, and players in the 1960s and early 1970s do not have steals and blocks tracked. Awards. This category will be defined by All-Star appearances, All-NBA selections, MVPs, Finals MVPs, and championships as the first, second, or third best player. The reason I have to only count championships as a top 3 player on the team is because otherwise, you get into the situation where, for example, Robert Horry has 7 rings and Karl Malone has 0, and it's not representative of how much better a player is if they weren't a top 3 player on their team contributing to a championship. I know including All-Star selections is a little bit controversial because it's fan-voted, but ultimately, this is what the Hall of Fame uses in their criteria to induct a player, as unfair as it sounds. Also, I'll be including ABA stats and awards and using them as equivalent to their respective NBA stats and awards. The only one that's different about the ABA is that instead of Finals MVP, they have Playoffs MVP, which honestly is a better idea than Finals MVP since it accounts for the whole playoffs, but just to keep it simple, I'll be referring to the ABA Playoffs MVP as Finals MVP here. Also, no All-NBA third team selections are counted, because All-NBA third teams weren't added until the late 80s, which is unfair to older players. Also, I'm not using any career total stats because that's a longevity thing. For example, no one would say that Karl Malone was a better scorer than Michael Jordan, even though he has more total points. And of course, this is only going to be my opinion from comparing the available metrics, since I have not watched most of these players live, or even been born when some of these players have been playing. And to keep it fair, I'm judging them based on how they did in their own era. No time travel or what if this NBA player played in today's era or the 1960s, none of that. I'll be strictly basing their stats and accomplishments within their own era against that era's competition, which makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys enjoy this comparison video and hopefully learn something new from it. In the 21st episode of the series, we take a look at 2 players who were on the recently announced NBA 75th anniversary team. I had made a previous video on my channel talking about how these 2 players were probably 2 of the weakest members of that team. However, I still wanted to delve more into what made these 2 players so highly regarded amongst older fans and seeing them exactly what made them so special. Dave Bing was a prototypical scoring point guard like Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Tiny Archibald of his era. He handled the scoring duties just as much as the passing duties. Bing is known as a Detroit Pistons legend, an explosive scorer, and formed a potent duo alongside fellow Hall of Famer Bob Lanier in the 1970s. Lenny Wilkens, on the other hand, was quite a different type of point guard. While Bing was known for his scoring, Wilkens was known for his passing, and retired second in assists behind only the Big O, Oscar Robertson. Wilkens was the main playmaker for both the St. Louis Hawks, where he played alongside Hawks legends Bob Pettit, Cliff Hagan, and Selma Beatty, as well as the newly formed Seattle Supersonics, where he was both a player and a coach alongside Hall of Famer Spencer Haywood. But which one of these 2 point guard legends had the better career? Let's find out. In the scoring category, Dave Bing is clearly the winner here, as he was known for his ability to slice up defenses, being an explosive scorer and leading the league in scoring in just his second year in the league. He averaged 20.3 points per game for his career, peaking at 27.1 points per game in 1968, leading the league in scoring that year, and 15.4 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 28.2 points per game in 1968. Keep in mind that Dave Bing had very limited playoff success, which is why his career playoff average is quite a bit lower, as most of his playoff games happened when he was near the end of his career. Wilkens put up modest numbers too, averaging 16.5 points per game for his career, peaking at 22.4 points per game in 1969, and 16.1 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 21.4 points per game in 1967. There's no contest here, as Dave Bing was the primary scorer on his team and sometimes co-primary scorer alongside his teammate Bob Lanier. So this one easily goes to Bing. In the rebounding category, it's a very interesting matchup, as Bing was just an average rebounder for his size, putting up 3.8 boards a game for his career, peaking at 5 per game in 1969, and only 2.7 rebounds per game in the playoffs, peaking at 4 per game in 1968. However, despite Wilkens being 2 inches shorter than Bing, he was quite possibly the third best rebounding point guard of his era, behind only the Big O and Jerry West. Wilkens averaged 4.7 rebounds per game for his career, peaking at 6.6 rebounds per game in 1962, and 5.8 boards per game in the playoffs, peaking at an impressive 7.6 boards per game in 1967. Now remember that Wilkens was only 6'1", so he was definitely the more athletic player of the two, so thus, I'm giving this category to him. In the passing category, while Bing was an above-average passer, averaging 6 assists per game for his career, peaking at 7.8 assists per game in 1973, and 4.3 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 9.7 per game in 1975, Wilkens has to be noted as one of the best passers of his era, as he averaged 6.7 assists per game for his career, peaking at an impressive 9.6 per game in 1972, and 5.8 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 7.8 assists per game in 1968. Now keep in mind that while Bing had the higher peak in the playoffs, that was based on only 3 playoff games that he played that year. Wilkens led the league in assists in 1970 and retired only behind Oscar Robertson in all-time assists, and his numbers rival that of only Oscar, Jerry West, and Tiny Archibald of his era, so this category definitely goes to him. In the efficiency category, it's quite close, as Bing had the higher power by a small margin, and Wilkens had the better true shooting percentage and win shares per 48 by a small margin. This category is close enough that I can't really pick one, and I'll have to call this one a tie. When it comes to defense, neither player had any all-defensive selections, but I'm giving this one to Wilkens as he has a substantial lead in defensive win shares and in defensive box plus minus. And yes, while he did play more games than Bing did, it's not enough to explain this large difference. Thus, the defense category will go to Wilkens. In the awards category, neither player won any championships, although Wilkens managed to make the finals in his rookie season. However, neither player experienced much playoff success in their primes, despite Bing playing with teammates such as Bob Lanier, and Wilkens playing with teammates such as Double Beatty and Spencer Haywood. Wilkens has slightly more All-Star appearances, but lacks any All-NBA selections, while Bing has both All-Star selections and 3 All-NBA selections. So just based on Bing's advantage in All-NBA selections, I'll have to give this category to Bing. So when all the categories are summed up, Bing takes the scoring and awards categories, while Wilkens takes the rebounding, passing, and defense categories, while the efficiency category is a tie, giving the win to Lenny Wilkens. Both of these players made their case for the NBA 75th anniversary team, and although I still would not take them over guys like Tony Parker and Dennis Johnson, who both had much more playoff success and yet got left off the list, I can understand that these guys were not completely undeserving either. Dave Bing was a dynamic scorer who was a vital part of the late 60s and early 70s Pistons teams, while Lenny Wilkens was one of the best playmakers and all-around players of his era for both the Hawks and the Sonics. While neither player had much playoff success, both are remembered well enough by older fans to earn them a spot amongst the greatest players of all time. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next comparison video.